What if I told you that I could prove that the world you live in is actually a simulation? But that simulation wasn't created by aliens or the government or AI. It was made by something far more realistic. Well, guess what? Mr. Hello and welcome to Rewrite Reality, a show about the science and technology of self-improvement. I am your host, Mr. Shores, and my goal for this video is simply to teach you something new. Now you might be thinking to yourself, didn't I already watch this video? Well, I can assure you this is going to be different. You see, this is what I call a galaxy brain explanation, so there's going to be a bit more detail this time than there was before. If you didn't already see the smooth brain explanation of this topic, it might be helpful for you to start there, so I will provide a link somewhere. Alright, let's get to it. If you've made it this far in life, you've probably heard someone say something to the effect of, "We live in a simulation," or "Life isn't real." In my experience, they're usually making a reference to a certain work of fiction where everyone wears leather jackets and dodges bullets, but I mean the overall sentiment isn't actually wrong. As of right now, you are actually living inside of a simulation, but it's one that you have created. And I don't mean that as a figure of speech or a metaphor, I mean you are literally creating the simulation right now. One of the first things that you really need to understand if you're trying to make changes in your life is that you don't live in reality. You live in your understanding of reality. Now, I'll admit that sounds like one of those quotes that you would see on like a terrible Facebook meme next to a picture of a sunset, so let's take a step back and unpack that. If you consider the real world to be everything that exists, we as humans can only interact with a small part of that. The smaller version of the real world that you live in is basically just a combination of all of your senses. That means that flaws and limits in your senses create flaws and limits in your world. Just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't actually exist. For example, a person can have red-green color blindness, which, as the name suggests, prevents them from being able to see the colors red and green. However, in the case of being colorblind, the fact that you can't see the color red doesn't mean that the color red doesn't exist. I can see red. My mom can see red. Everybody else can, well, not everybody else, but most people can see red. So it's not a matter of something not existing in the real world. It's a matter of your senses not being able to pick it up. You see, the funny thing is that the world is bigger than you are. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than really any of us individually. The problem is how many people ever want to admit that their worldview has flaws and limitations. Now, if you don't study neuroscience, all of this probably sounds extremely made up. So let's do something to make it seem a bit more real. One of the easiest ways to explain this is with vision. So let's play a game. Wherever you are, I want you to take a look around at your environment. Look straight ahead. Now look to your right. Now look behind you. Now look to your left. Everything probably looks pretty normal because I haven't done anything yet. Now I want you to close your left eye and do the same thing. Look in front of you, to your right, behind you, and to your left. Now one more time, but this time close your right eye. Look in front of you, to your right, behind you, and to your left. Chances are when you looked around all 3 times, your surroundings looked more or less the same. Sure, your field of view is a little bit smaller given the fact that you closed an eye, but overall the picture didn't look too different, right? There weren't any like drastic changes or anything. Well, if the 2 times you looked around with one of your eyes closed looked more or less the same as when you looked around with both eyes, guess what? You don't live in the real world, which according to Google means you're delusional. Congratulations. Now you're probably wondering how closing one eye proves that you don't actually live in reality. Well, the reason is that each one of your individual eyes has a blind spot. Now, I'm not talking about the type of blind spot that you see in like anime and movies where the guy like teleports behind you. I'm talking about a blind spot in your actual field of vision. Due to the anatomy of your eyeballs, if you close one eye, there is a spot that the open eye physically cannot see near the middle of its field of view. And that's true whether you realize and accept it or not. When both eyes are open, the blind spot of your left eye falls into what the right eye can see, so it doesn't really matter. And of course, vice versa. However, with one eye closed, you quite literally are not getting the full picture. In order to understand how this is even possible, let's talk for a moment about vision. Vision normally works in about 5 main steps, right? So step 1 is that light comes from a source, like, I don't know, the sun. Step 2 is that light bounces off of an object. Step 3 is that bounced light then enters into your eye and touches the back wall. Step 4 is that your brain decodes the information it gets from the back wall of your eye. And step 5 is that you see said object. From here, the actual anatomy of the blind spot is fairly straightforward, I hope. During step 3, where light goes into your eye and touches the sensors on the back wall, there's a spot on that back wall, also called the retina, that connects to the tube that sends the information from your eyes to your brain, which is called the optic nerve. The spot where those sensors and that tube connect is called the optic disc. Now this is arguably the most important term here that you probably aren't familiar with, so I'm going to make optic disc this video's golden word. The golden word is basically one thing that you can Google for more information if you think I'm making all of this up. The optic disc exists because that nerve that sends all of this information to your brain takes up a little bit of space on the retina. So in that little bit of space that it takes up, there isn't really any room to have any light sensors. If you don't believe me, allow me to try and show you. This is probably going to be easiest if you're on a phone, but if you're watching this on a larger screen like a TV, there's no harm in trying. You just might look a little weird. Here's a picture of a cross and a mouse. I want you to close your left eye and hold this image as close as possible to your open right eye. Now, stare directly at the cross and don't break eye contact with it. Now I want you to slowly move further and further away from the screen. At some point, the object to the right of this cross is going to disappear, and the only thing that you're going to see is the white background. Here, I'll give you a second to pause the video and try this a few times. Congratulations, you found your blind spot. Leave a comment if it actually disappeared for you. Now you may be wondering why I brought any of this up. Well, to me, the most important part of this whole thing isn't necessarily that there's a dead zone in the middle of your eye, because clearly not being able to see a few cubic centimeters in front of you doesn't cause people too many problems. Rather, it's how casually your brain smooths over this dead zone, without having someone, like myself, to explain that this blind spot exists. Most people probably would never even realize on their own. The part of your brain that processes vision is called the occipital lobe. While the work that it does is extremely complex, which is why we still study it to this day, it can only process the information that it's given. The blind spot doesn't look like anything because there isn't any data for the occipital lobe to process, so it just doesn't do anything. You figure if there was a giant gaping black hole every time you closed one of your eyes, that would at least suggest that your brain could tell that there's something that should be there, but just isn't. However, that's not the way that your anatomy is set up. Because a black hole would be the same as having sensors there, but there's just no light hitting them. In this case, there are no sensors. The same way that your occipital lobe isn't receiving light signals from, I don't know, your tongue, it's not receiving light-in signals from that part of your eye. And so as far as it's concerned, that part of your eye is just as much of an eyeball as your tongue. As a result, you simply live your life interacting with the information that your brain has access to. And so I encourage you to look at your life and ask the question, what other blind spots do you have in your life? In what kinds of situations do you find yourself glossing over details for the sake of convenience? As we just saw, your brain has a tendency to gloss over details it doesn't have, so it's important for you to reevaluate every once in a while to make sure you aren't missing anything critically important. However, if you're a human being, chances are you probably have a few blind spots in your life. I certainly did. An easy example for me is how I used to have absolutely no concern whatsoever for my appearance. Look at this. This is arguably the worst picture of me that has ever been taken, period. Was I going through a lot then? Yes, but that's still no excuse for this fit. Like, oh my. Oh, boy. Now it might sound small in the grand scheme of things, but going around looking like this really had a drastic impact on how I lived my life. You know, there were times where it really prevented me from getting to the outcomes that I wanted in life. And that, in turn, had effects on my state of mind and mental health. It wasn't until I really took a look in the mirror, literally, that I was really able to understand this part of my life that I was neglecting for the sake of convenience. But now look at your boy. I wear suits. But in all seriousness, the first step to making any real change in your life is the ability to take an honest look at yourself and understand where your gaps are. Now, I mean, trying to fix them all is borderline impossible. But At the very least, understanding what they are at least gives you more insight as to where you might need to be a little more cautious or a little more patient. As I said at the beginning, you don't live in reality, you live in your understanding of reality. So work hard to make sure that your understanding is as close to the real deal as possible. Stay blessed. If you're interested in more content like this, then subscribe to the channel to make sure that you're notified when the next Smooth Brain video is released. In that video, I'll be going over a different topic, starting off with a simpler explanation, and then we'll transition to Galaxy like this one. As of right now, I'm doing this entire show by myself. I wrote the music, I do the art, the animation, the research, all of it. So your support and feedback help me to build the channel. Thank you.